The old model still did best with women who had spent part of their lives speaking into bad microphones. That was not a category anyone had designed for. On paper, the routing stack sorted by intent, urgency, language confidence, prohibited terms, callback probability. In practice, there were pockets of strange competence that survived every quarterly refresh. Callers from farm report stations in the Central Valley, church secretaries with paper calendars open under one hand, women who had once done pledge drives for public radio and now called their insurance carrier from kitchens with a fan running overhead. The newer model beat the old one everywhere the benchmarks were clean. Then a call would come in from somewhere with soft line noise and an older female voice set carefully inside it, and the old stack would transcribe her on the first pass as if it had been waiting all day. Leah kept a notebook for these things because nobody else in maintenance believed in writing them down. Not a lab notebook. A narrow spiral pad with a coffee ring gone brown through the cover and dates written at the top of each page in the same compact hand she used for grocery lists. She wrote down the failed escalations and the little embarrassments the metrics did not know how to keep. Tuesday, 1412 policy update improves hold music bleed, worsens rotary consonants. Thursday, 0903, old model hears Mrs. Alvarez type voices better than any system we can currently afford. Friday, 1840. Everyone says legacy bias when they mean the broken thing still helps somebody. At 10:30, the floor sounded like ventilation and distant throat clearing from other headsets. Nobody used the office willingly after dark, but the overnight queue had backed up, and Leah was still there with the support dashboards open in 4 windows and a pair of cracked studio headphones pressing a dent into her hair. On one screen, a spectrogram held still long enough to look painted. On another, gradient norms from the latest fine-tuning pass descended layer by layer in tired blue bars. The top of the graph was alive with adjustment. The middle had enough movement to justify optimism. The earliest encoder block sat near 0, not exactly flat but diminished to a stubborn dusting of change. She had seen the plot before. Everyone had. The report called it expected attenuation. Vic from research called it the part at the bottom where prayer stops working. Leah had laughed the first time he said it because he was holding a peach yogurt and looked too pleased with himself. Later, she wrote the line down anyway. At 11, Vic came over with his access badge clipped to the hem of his sweater instead of his belt, which meant he had dressed in the dark. He leaned on the low partition and looked at her screens without pretending not to. You still babysitting 14? Somebody should. Product wants the legacy fallback disabled before the next billing cycle. Leah moved her cursor to the evaluation tab. 20 clipped calls sat in a queue for review. Beside them, the comparison scores glowed in corporate colors. Model A22B in green, Stack 14 in gray. The green won often enough to make the slide deck true. Then product can disable it in daylight, she said. Vic's mouth twitched. He was one of the few people in research old enough to remember when the system had been built in-house, before 3 acquisitions and a rename meant nobody knew what any acronym had originally stood for. I pulled the layer stats you asked for, he said. You were right. Earliest blocks are taking almost nothing. Almost? Enough to be mathematically polite. He set a paper cup beside her keyboard. The lid had gone soft at the seam. She could smell burnt coffee through it. If you want the sermon version, he said. We kept fine-tuning on top of a foundation we never really touched again. By now, the top knows all kinds of new tricks. The bottom still thinks it's 2018. That's the non-sermon version? The sermon version uses the word fossilized. She clicked into the report. Gradient norms tapered as they descended, then fell off so completely that the last 4 bars looked like dust the plotting tool had forgotten to wipe away. Can you unfreeze them? She asked. Vic made a face. Not if you like uptime. That's not what I asked. Sure, we can unfreeze anything once. He straightened, rubbing one thumb over the wet ring his coffee had left on the partition. The trouble is those early features hold up half the acoustics. Room tone, line hiss, how consonants break when somebody is talking through a mouth full of denture adhesive and a prepaid handset. We crack that open and the rest of the stack spends a month forgetting what a kitchen sounds like. He left her with the coffee and the report. At 11:20, she started pulling bad calls. The interface laid them out cleanly enough to make the failures feel almost civic. Waveform, transcript, confidence, downstream route. A woman in Modesto called to say the insulin shipment had not arrived. The new stack heard install and sent her to device activation. The old one heard insulin, then hesitated over shipment, then got there on the second pass with a confidence low enough to sound ashamed of itself. A retired bookkeeper in Tulare said she needed the plan that covered heart medicine, and the new stack offered hearing aids twice before apologizing into the hold music. The old one made fewer mistakes, not because it was generally smarter, but because somewhere in its earliest layers, it still expected vowels to come padded with static and patience. Leah copied the case IDs into her spiral pad. By midnight, she had a page of them. Nobody in the office used the little listening room anymore. It had been built for annotation back when contractors sat shoulder to shoulder with transcription pedals under their desks, and management still believed that better labeling could be solved by glass. Now the room held a scuffed table, a docking station for obsolete laptops, and a cabinet full of old training drives no one had thrown away because deleting them felt more official than leaving them to gather dust. Leah took her headphones in there after midnight, because the dashboard audio sounded thinner through the speakers at her desk, more like an example than a voice. The cabinet inventory had not been updated in 2 years. She found a drive labeled Anxious Set Civic, de Mont Vent Hivo. The cabinet inventory had not been updated in 2 years. She found a drive labeled Anxious Set Civic, Donut reformat in blue tape with one edge peeling free. The faceless thumb mounted slowly, like a person standing up with bad knees. Folders opened onto older folders. Donors, public service, IVR seed, clean read female 3. She clicked through them with the same feeling she got in basements where people had been storing useful objects for too long. At the end of one path sat 200 short WAV files in a text document called sessionnotes.txt. The notes were plain enough to hurt. Volunteer readers recorded prompts in the county library media room on Thursday afternoons. Retakes limited due to room booking. HVACs unavoidable. Reader 3 prefers to begin again from top of paragraph even for single-word errors. Tea provided by front desk when available. Leah put on her headphones and opened the first file. A woman said, "Please say in a few words how I can help you today." Not an actor, not a polished voice actor, with the bright, neutral warmth companies paid for now. This woman sounded as if she had spent years being careful on purpose. The microphone was cheap. The room carried a mild fan hum and the tiny hard edges of public space. On the next file, she said, "Billing questions." On the next, "Prescription coverage." On the next, "Representative." Leah kept listening. Reader 3 had a low, grainy voice with one soft California R that barely touched the roof of the mouth. She clipped the ends of longer words as if time in the booth were borrowed. In one file, she breathed in before the prompt and laughed once under it, not enough to count as contamination, just enough to tell on a body still attached to the sentence. Leah looked back at the support queue. Mrs. Alvarez type voices she had written earlier, meaning only a vocal shape she knew from school offices and dental reminders, and women who had learned to speak clearly over somebody else's machinery. Now the old files gave that competence a source humiliatingly simple. The system had learned to listen from women who made themselves understood in rooms that were never really built for sound. At 1 in the morning, Diane sent a message marked low priority and therefore impossible to ignore. Need recommendation by 9. Can we fully retire Stack 14 this quarter or not? Leah let it sit while she listened to 5 more clips. On file 47, Reader 3 stumbled over authorization and began again from the top of the sentence exactly as the note had warned. There was a pause in which a chair leg scraped tile. Then, farther from the microphone, another woman's voice said something Leah replayed 3 times before she trusted the shape of it. "Take your time, Miriam." Miriam. Maybe. That was all. No surname. No biography. Just enough of a name for someone in the room to ask a kindness of her 20-odd years before a model turned her into features. Leah replayed the line, not because it mattered to the routing quality and not because it didn't. At 2, she wrote Diane a recommendation she hated even while typing it. Do not retire Stack 14 without preserving legacy fallback for low-bandwidth older voice traffic. Current model underperforms on landlines and degraded domestic acoustic environments. Issue appears rooted in frozen early feature extractors from legacy anchor corpus. Later fine-tuning compensates above them but does not revise them. She deleted older voice traffic and replaced it with affected acoustic segment. Then she changed it back. There were cleaner ways to say it, and each one lied a little more. When she came out of the listening room, the office had entered its honest hour, vending machine glow, a vacuum somewhere down the hall catching on thresholds, the windows over the parking structure beginning to admit a color that had not yet decided whether it belonged to night or morning. Vic was asleep in a conference room with his badge still clipped to his sweater hem. Leah could see one shoe from under the glass. At 2:38, another failed call dropped into review because the queue never respected revelation. A woman in Fresno asked for the department that handled replacement glucose sensors. The new model heard replacement close enough, then lost the rest in refrigerator hum and rerouted her to general benefits. The old stack caught glucose on the second try. Sensor took 3 passes and a recovery prompt. By then, the woman on the line had gone quiet in the specific way people did when deciding whether a machine was worth explaining themselves to. Leah listened to that silence 3 times. Then she opened the gradient report again. The earliest bars still sat there, almost nothing, carrying more than they could be persuaded to admit. Everything built afterward had learned to live with them. There was no path back through enough signal to make the first hearing new. She thought of Miriam in the county library, tea maybe cooling on a side table, beginning again from the top because that was how she preferred to repair a sentence. She thought of callers years later, older now than the woman in the recordings had sounded, speaking carefully into kitchens and clinics and cars with the windows up. The system met them best where it had first been taught, and nothing in the dashboard knew where to put that. At 3:07, Diane replied with one line. Can you quantify affected segment? Leah set her fingers on the keyboard and did not type. Across the glass, the east side of the building picked up light row by row. The cleaning crew had left their yellow caution sign by the elevators, folded open in the middle like a small bright tent. On her desk, the burnt coffee had gone cold enough to show a skin. She opened a fresh page in the spiral pad instead. Miriam? She wrote at the top. The question mark came out smaller than the rest of her handwriting. Beneath it, she wrote the case IDs, one under another, and beside each one the place where the call had come from. Modesto, Tulare, Fresno, Madera. Then she wrote the phrases the old stack had caught and the new one had not. Insulin shipment. Heart medicine. Glucose sensors. Representative. She wrote them the way people had said them, with the clipped edges and the extra air and the patience. Only after that did she answer Diane. Not yet. I need a manual pass. She turned back to the first file. Through the old headphones came the county library room intact. Cheap microphone, fan hum, a chair leg grazing tile, and Miriam's careful voice beginning again from the top.